Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Melissa and Lori Love Literacy. We are super pumped up today because we have the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. David Liben here with us. He has synthesized research behind the Common Core standards. He's worked with student achievement partners, and we are thrilled to talk to him today. Melissa, how are you feeling right now?
Super excited. So David gave a speech for all of our teachers teaching wit and wisdom at the beginning of this school year, and it was just super inspiring. Not to mention he has a book, Know Better, Do Better, that came out this year that a ton of people have read and we've talked about on this podcast. And so we're definitely really excited to talk to him today.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love the book. If you haven't purchased it yet, please go out and purchase it. It's on Amazon and really anywhere, but we also like to plug Amazon. 2-day shipping, you got the book in your hands. Know Better, Do Better by the Liben. So, all right, without further ado, David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Is this your first podcast appearance?
I am really old and have been involved in a long time. So my first podcast was at a library, and it was the first time that I spoke in 2010, right after the standards were basically in place. And it was quite an experience speaking into a computer with no audience for the first time ever. So, no, I've done a bunch of podcasts and probably more webinars. Got it.
Well, I bet that you haven't podcasted with anyone like us. So we are happy that you're here today.
That's actually true.
You did like the OG version of a podcast. So we are so excited to talk to you, especially about some of those key points that still stick with us about that speech that you did in Baltimore. And really that's what prompted us to reach out to you because you made such an impact. And it was funny for our listeners out there when I was like, David, you made such an impact. We want a podcast with you. He was like, I don't remember what I said. What did I say?
We do. We remember.
We do. So David, we want to attack this idea of, or address this idea of how and why do old habits die hard? Like, for example, in terms of isolated skill instruction versus knowledge building. So why do you think that this is such a big shift in education happening right now? And what is going on in terms of this movement from isolated skills to knowledge building? And why is there resistance?
All right. Well, you're starting off with a rather important, large question.
Go big or go home, right?
I call this question I actually have a name for this question. It's called the if you bring your car to a blacksmith, he'll put horseshoes on it question. It's completely understandable why people are going to do what they used to, why teachers are going to do what they used to. And teaching is not like we're recording something here. So if I screw up big time, you guys will just erase it and start again, or you'll cut it out or something. Teaching, like Broadway shows, is live. And it's a live audience, very live in most cases. And if you're not comfortable doing something, that's really difficult. It's very easy to fall back on what you're used to. And the kind of teaching, whether it's systematic phonics or the knowledge-based curriculums that have come out since the standards, virtually no teachers, that is almost still true, that teachers go through their undergraduate and or graduate training, and they don't learn about literacy through the medium of these types of curriculums. They're going to be changing a little bit. Relay is a graduate school of education in different parts of the country that was started out of one of the not-for-profits, and they are close to it, but even they don't use these curriculum as a means of teaching. So teachers haven't learned this type of teaching, number one. And number two, when you're in that situation in front of a live audience, it produces stress. And I think the other reason, or another reason, is that people don't see, since they don't have the background in this, we don't see why it's more powerful. And the best way to show that actually is through an example. I mean, I worked really with all of these curriculums that have come out except one. And if you take a look at them, and I'm going to look through one. I'm going to look through grade 3, module 3 in wit and wisdom. Okay. And this is a module on immigration. And really, the topic in this case could have been any nonfiction topic. And there's a section they're reading a text, and the text is an introduction. And it says, in this particular part, students collaboratively annotate the paragraph for the features of an effective introduction to an explanatory essay as follows. And the next section says, students circle the part of the introduction that catches the reader's attention and use the blank column to explain how the introduction catches the reader's attention. Now, think for a minute. How is that different than traditional guided reading, whether it's through a program like Teachers College Units of Study or as it's done in a basal? In that situation, students will come up in a group, and the teacher might ask them to read an introduction to a nonfiction piece of text and think about why it's effective. And so she'll give them a minute to think about it, and then they'll talk about it. This is a little different, though. And here, they're asking the students to all write their answers, and then they go over it. Writing really forces you to clarify your thinking. In a traditional guided reading, not likely that you would have time to do all that, because in guided reading, you've got to shuffle through 3, 4, or sometimes even 5 groups. You only have 10 or maybe 15 minutes in your group with your leveled text. Here, since it's whole class, there's more time, and you can do that right. That's 2 big differences. There's time, and there's the idea of writing. Where, again, in a traditional guided reading situation, the teacher might pose the question. If it's a stronger teacher, she might have, the students might be aware that any of them can be called on to answer that question. But very often that's not the case either. And kids volunteer, and the teacher picks to volunteer, often the stronger of the students in the group. And kids often know, well, I don't know, I'm not going to worry about this. I don't really get this. But Jose's sharp. I know he'll raise his hand and answer the question. So then it goes on. Students then underline the topic of the essay and use the blank column to explain how we know what the topic of the essay is. And they're looking for things like there's many reasons why people left home. This is about immigration. Or because it's all the sentences talk about people leaving home. And again, the students have to write. And again, the students have to, after they write, then they're called on to answer. But they've written it, and it's forced them to get their thoughts out. Then students write a 1 in the blank column next to the first important point that they picked, a 2 next to the second, and a 3 next to the third. Well, again, here you're not writing it, but you're using what you learned in the first 2 parts of the lesson, where you out what the topic was and where you wrote the important points. You don't usually have that in traditional guided reading, whether it's in, as I said, something like Units of Study or a basal. In that case, you're usually jumping from one kind of reading strat. Let's do a prediction now, and then let's do an inference now, and then let's do vocabulary. You don't stay on something long enough to really get a sense of it as you are here. because you have more time. And in addition, you're reaching here a number, but by doing this, you're dealing with the structure strategy 5, in this case for informational text. You're dealing with the main idea or theme structure standard, and standard 2, the main idea or theme standard. So you're interacting with both of these standards in this lesson, while also learning what makes an introduction a good introduction, while also doing some writing to clarify your thoughts. And then it says, students store the paper and writing folders to reference throughout the module. You never do that in any kind of traditional guided reading or guided reading setting. Mm-hmm. And that's what academic learning is. Academic learning, when you move into middle school or high school and in college, is where you learn something, you keep a record of that learning, and you use it to learn more later on. So, and then you go to the next part here. What makes this paragraph an effective introduction to the explanatory essay? And then they're looking for the kids to talk about it. Gets your attention. It tells you what the topic it is. It identifies the main points. Essentially, it synthesizes what just happened. So you're synthesizing all the learning in a lesson. You're meeting a number of standards. You're keeping the information that you have so that you use later. Traditional guided reading does nothing like that. And I think, well, actually, and that I haven't even gotten to the most important part.
Oh, well, tell us more.
The important part is that to become a proficient reader, you have to have sufficient vocabulary and you have to have sufficient knowledge of the world. And the lesson that I just described is part of a unit on immigration. And as studying immigration for a period of 5 to 8 weeks or whatever it is, you're growing your knowledge of the world. I'm going to stop there before I go a little bit more into knowledge and vocabulary, and see if you have any questions or any follow-up on the basis of that. But my point is that if teachers don't see how this approach meets the standards and don't see the power of this approach, then it's hard for them to make the switch to something that they've been doing most of their teaching career or all of their teaching career and they're more comfortable with. And the last part of that is administrators need to give teachers room to learn that and as much as possible a totally comfort, risk-free environment. So that's not a mouthful, that's 3 mouthfuls, so I'll stop.
Yeah, David, I was going to say, something I've heard and that you sparked in me that to remember is I've heard a lot of teachers saying, especially in the lower grades, there's just too much whole group instruction. And when you talked through that, what I heard you talking about were what were the benefits of the whole group time, which I don't know that they've fully, been able to see what the benefits are, because what they know are the benefits of what they've done before, not necessarily the benefits of what is new to them.
Exactly. And of course, there's no research in terms of literacy, in terms of improving students' reading proficiency, small group versus whole group. There's, in terms of this kind of work, there is research in terms of foundational skills, but that's not particular. That's not what we're talking about here. But that's a good point. If you don't see the benefit of it, then why make a switch to whole class?
Yeah, and one of the things that, in terms of not just seeing the benefit of or keeping in mind the benefit of something new when you only have experience with something that's not what you're currently doing, is an additional benefit that you mentioned, David, but you didn't explicitly say, so I want to call it out, is that you talked about that synthesizing in the lesson, but it's really also the synthesizing within the lesson and among lessons, and then among the whole year of lessons, and then among the whole trajectory of you as a student in this school system. So from K through 8, your experience with the knowledge and learning as it grows. So building on that throughout the course of your educational career. And I think that is something that is, another shift that we're making, in not just being the student's experience in 4th grade or in my classroom, but really thinking about how that educational experience looks for the student over the course of his or her elementary and middle school and high school trajectory, and what knowledge and skills we're giving that child, really, and then that young adult to, as you said, prepare in the way that they need to. Like, I always think of it like that portfolio of knowledge, like they're taking all of the knowledge and skills with them to be prepared. And you had mentioned that, but you didn't use the portfolio metaphor or visual. So that just made me think about that and what it looks like over the course of the years. Is there any thing that you've seen as you've been in schools that has reinforced that idea?
Yeah, and the first thing that comes to mind is in a written wisdom school, they were starting. I believe they were starting a new module, and they were starting it with, at some point, I don't know if it was the first activity, but with notice and wonder, and the teacher had taken book covers from some of the previous books that the students had read, and she put them in groups. And all of these curriculum have plenty of time in groups. She put them in groups and had them reflect back using their journals or using their other material or just remembering what were some of the noticings and wondering they had with those other texts. And then they had the pictures of the other text in the front of the room because, as I said, she cut out the book covers. So that's setting a whole different mindset of learning. Rather than having a mindset of this week we're doing inferencing and next week we're doing theme and the week after that we're doing text structure and the week after that we're doing prediction. It's a mindset about knowledge and synthesizing learning and using what you have learned to help you learn more. In addition to that being an entirely different mindset, it's way more interesting. There's very few students are excited and go home to tell their parents about how they learned about making an inference today. But what they may have learned about sharks or whales or immigrants or squids, etc., or Japanese paintings, that's a whole different story. That's what they've been doing in elite private schools for generations.
And I would say that's feedback we're actually hearing from parents here in Baltimore, is that they actually are able to talk to their kids, and their kids come home excited about what they're learning.
Exactly. And so many of these things, so many of these parts of these lessons connect to other parts. But if teachers don't see it, they don't see the how the standards are there, and they don't see the power of this kind of learning, which unfortunately, you don't see it in like 2 days. You have to do it over a period of time. And related to that, this happened when I was doing some PD in Baltimore, but the same exact thing happened. I think it might have been Denver, but with EL, another curriculum. In that, principals would say the teachers don't know the standards, and so I said, okay, let's take a look at the lesson. And let's take a look at the questions. And we'd go look at a question, and then I put up the standard, and I said, okay, so this is the interaction standard, let's say, standard 3 in literary text, the connection between the different components of literature, plot, theme, setting, etc. Do these 3 questions get at that? And universally, they would say, yeah, it's lined up with the standard. Well, that's not a shock, because a lot of effort went into writing these curriculums to make sure that the tasks and the assessments and the questions reflected the standards. So you don't have to worry about the standards per se, and you don't have to worry about teachers' knowledge of the standards, because they're built into the curriculum. That's why people chose the curriculum, because it's aligned with the standards. It also happens to be aligned with the research about how the human mind begins to read and grows as a reader. But most of the time, the problem that the sense that people have is it's not aligned with the standards. We have to dig down. We have to really dig down on the standards. And that's a total mistake. A, because it's invalid, it's embedded in the curriculum, and B, because then you go off track. And instead of spending as much time as humanly possible on doing and learning the curriculum, you go off track to explore some standards, or you, at worst, you bring out some worksheets on this standard or this comprehension strategy, which completely leaves you astray.
Can I ask you, David, too, something I've heard similar to that but slightly different is using assessments to go to the standards. So they'll assess their students and they'll say, this many students didn't do well on this standard. So then they end up doing something similar, like worksheets for those standards or one lesson for those standards. What are your thoughts on how to use assessments effectively with this kind of curriculum?
Well, a standard, like a skill, and remind me to talk more about knowledge and vocabulary, okay?
Okay, we won't forget.
Skill do not work that way with literature. If you have a skill, and people treat the standards very often as skills, like skill playing a piano is a skill. If you can play the piano, you can play the piano on a pretty cheap, shoddy piano, and you can play it on a cheap, shoddy piano, and you can play it on a Steinway that costs tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you know how to dribble a basketball, you can dribble a basketball in the hallway, or you can dribble a basketball in the gym, or you can dribble a basketball in Madison Square Garden. That doesn't work with standards and skills, because if you can have a complete understanding of the structure standard, you understand the different structures of informational text, compare and contrast, chronological, goal, problem, solution, goal, action, outcome, etc. But then you come to the text, and there are references to events or ideas or concepts or people that you never heard of, and there's tier 2 vocabulary words that you can't understand. You cannot exercise that skill or that standard with that text. So the idea of teaching us to a standard just doesn't work, because text presents obstacles that an understanding of a standard does not give you a tool to overcome those obstacles. And that's a very common misconception, and it causes a lot of confusion throughout.
I think I might just record that little snippet and play it for people over and over.
I think this is so timely, too, because it's test prep season, so I'm happy that we're having this conversation.
I have a 20 or 30-page piece that I wrote for the college board about this, and I don't know when it's public, but if you ping me in a week or two, and if it's public and I can send it to you, I'd be glad to do that. And you could put it wherever you can put it to make it helpful.
That'd be great. We could link it.
On Text at the Center is a piece written by my wife, Meredith, and Sue Pimentel, the primary writer, one of the primary writers of the ELA standards. It's called Text at the Center, and it's on Achieve the Core, the Student Achievement Partners website, and it's about 9 or 10 pages directly addressed to just this particular question. And there's an insert that explains how it relates to test taking, and how traditional test prep and test prep leads you astray and is basically a big waste of time. And I wrote that insert into the article that was written by Meredith and Sue. That's very helpful for people who want to get their heads around this question of both test prep and teaching standards in isolation.
That's immensely helpful. David, we will link that in our show notes. We will find that and link that. Thank you. So this is such a hot topic, and especially for this time of the year, but why do you think the pervasive test prep or the pervasive need to find standards within a curriculum that is a high-quality standards-aligned curriculum continues? What is the why behind that?
Well, teacher accountability, for one. It scares people. And if they believe that somehow, it's almost like the analogy I use is in football, we really have to cross the goal line. So we're going to just teach them how to get across the goal line from the 2-yard line, because it's a lot easier than starting in the 20-yard line or starting wherever you happen to start after the kickoff. But it doesn't work, because in real life, you don't always start on the 2-yard line. And I think what happens is there's this hope that if I just give them tests and go over those tests, it would bump up their scores. And that hope is enhanced by pressure with teacher accountability and pressure to do well. That's number one. Number two, we've been doing text prep in our educational system for decades now, and it hasn't raised the bar on scores for the children we need to help the most. So how often are we going to keep on doing it? And number three, it has the same problem that we talked about with teaching to a standard rather than teaching text and text at the center. So I think for all these reasons, it's very hard to move people away from test prep. It's also boring as shit.
That is true.
It really is. It really is.
I don't know if that's allowed on the podcast. Is that going to get cut?
No, it is. We, you can curse away. We'll just click a button that says explicit language, and we'll let all the moms and dads know who are teachers or educators listening. Don't listen in the car with your babies. It's all good. No, it is boring. It's boring as heck. I have a little one myself, and I often talk about it. She does not have a high-quality curriculum in her school, and it pains me to see what she brings home every day in terms of both like physical, but also like what she tries to engage me with play. Like, let's play, let's find the text features, and she'll make an organizer, and it's just very inauthentic. But then in terms of like test prep, I can see it happening, and she comes home really upset, and she's a kid who can mostly behave herself in school, and she is very upset when they have to do test prep. And it's not, and seeing it as doing it as an educator, and then like seeing it in your own child is just a completely different experience. And it makes you feel shameful that you did that. Like I did that when I was a teacher, that we did test prep because we thought it was the thing to do. And like you said, David, know better, do better. And, we know that that's not the thing to do right now, but it's still painful that some kids, including my own, still have to do that, So like, I would love for you, David, if you could speak to leaders who are listening right now, like what would be your advice? What would you share with them about test prep? Because it is like a big conversation.
Well, most of what I would say to leaders, I've said, but for leaders, I guess I implore them to, how many years have you been doing it? And has it bumped up your scores? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is what I've already said, that it doesn't work because you're usually focusing on a standard or a strategy, and the mastery of the standard or a strategy doesn't necessarily transfer to other texts. And the primary reason it doesn't transfer to other texts is because other texts present demands, especially grade level texts, which is all we're dealing with on tests, present demands of background knowledge and vocabulary. And if you don't grow that by test prep. And that brings me to the issue of knowledge and vocabulary. I went through
I knew we would get back to it.
A series of steps on the lesson on wit and wisdom. And you saw how it connected to standards. One part led to the next. Students had to write their answers, which helped them think about it, and then you reviewed it, and then you put it away to use for later information, for later work. So you had all those very positive educational pieces to it, and that was not the most important. The most important was it was part of a 6 to 8 week unit on immigration. Now, how that kind of approach to education grows knowledge is fairly clear. When you jump around from topic to topic, as often happens in a traditional guided reading or balanced literacy approach, 1 week you're doing insects, or one day you're doing insects, and the next day you're doing the elections, and the next day you're doing tree frogs. There's a couple of problems with that. One, the learning never gets a chance to sink in the way that it does when you're staying on a topic. Two, that advantages children who have wider background knowledge. They know a little bit about trees, frogs, or a little bit about insects, or a little bit about elections. But students who have less wide background knowledge, jumping around like that, disadvantages them relative usually to their more high SES peers who have a wider background knowledge. So that's number 2. Number 3 is even more powerful. A study, which you should definitely post, by Cervetti, Hwang, and Wright, done I think about 4 or 5 years ago, was a really elegant piece of research. They took 5 or 6 texts and they had two sets of texts. And one set was all about birds. So there were 6 texts. They were all about birds, and they were conceptually coherent. So the first one might have been an introduction to birds. The second one might have been about bird feathers. The third one, bird reproduction. The fourth one, nests, and so forth. And then the other set was about 5 different topics, and one of which was about birds, and the other one might have been about barns or cars, etc. But they jumped around, like as often happens in guided reading or basils, etc. But what they did was they implanted in each set 10 tier 2 words. You know, what we called academic vocabulary with the standards, in order to confuse as many people in the country as possible, which was a tremendous success. So tier 2 vocabulary, and they put the same 10 words, they embedded them in each set of texts. And then they had the kids read the text, do some traditional teaching with the text, read the text, answer a series of questions, etc. And then they assessed the knowledge of these 10 words. So again, you had one group of kids was reading 5 texts all on birds. Another group was reading 5 texts that jumped around from topic to topic. But each group of texts had the same 10 tier 2 words. And they assessed on how many were learned. And sure enough, the kids who read the 5 conceptually coherent texts on the same topic learned more of the tier 2 vocabulary, not vocabulary connected to birds, tier 2 vocabulary like significant, important, various, etc. They learned more tier 2 vocabulary by staying on the topic over the period of a week or 2 that they read those texts. Now, vocabulary is absolutely fundamental to comprehending grade-level text. If you have this effect in a week or so of learning, just by reading 5 texts, the magnitude of that effect increases exponentially when you're spending 6 to 8 weeks on the same topic. You're looking at art on that topic. You're doing writing on that topic. You're reading prose on that topic. You're reading poetry on that topic. You're having discussions on that topic. The effect on vocabulary growth is, compared to traditional instruction, is enormous. So all those comparisons I made when I did that little brief look at a written wisdom lesson compared to a guided reading, none of that is as important as the fact that it's part of a module that grows vocabulary and knowledge. And when students take a test with grade-level material, especially since half of it, since the standards has to be informational text, unless they have a certain quantity of background knowledge and vocabulary, it doesn't matter what standards they've mastered, it doesn't matter what comprehension strategies they've learned, they will not be able to do well with that assessment unless they've grown vocabulary and grown knowledge. And that is what this curriculum and the other high-quality materials are designed to do 5 days a week, 4 weeks a month, 10 months a year. That's even more important than the differences that I outlined before. And you guys should post the Cervetti, Whang, and Wright paper, which I'll be glad to send to you.
Yeah, so I'm trying to pull it up. Is it called Conceptual Coherence, Comprehension, and Vocabulary Acquisition, a Knowledge Effect?
Yep.
Yeah, we'll definitely link that. That's great. I know that you wrote something as well, David. I think on 2018 with Student Achievement Partners, Vocabulary in the Common Core.
Yeah, I would have thought I wrote it before that, but what do I know? I'm old. I forget a lot of stuff.
maybe it was before, but that's what's showing.
Yeah, I did write that. And I also wrote with David Pearson a paper called Progression of Comprehension that is also related to what we're talking about. But perhaps the most closely related to what a lot of our discussion has been my lovely wife's paper with Sue Pimentel, Text at the Center, which is also on Achieve the Core.
Mm-hmm. What made Meredith want to write that, collaborate with Pimentel and write that?
Exactly what the questions that you've been asking, because people are doing tests, they're teaching isolated standards. That's the reason that they wanted to write that.
Well, we thank them for it. Thank you for all these fabulous research-based resources that we can use, not only to build our own knowledge, but also to, support districts as they adopt high-quality curricula. And as teachers are implementing it, it's so helpful to have these resources. So y'all's work is just really fundamental, and we're so grateful for it. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything else you want to say about?
Can I throw in a quick question, Lori?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. I wanted to see if David was finished with knowledge and vocabulary, because he said to remind him.
About that.
Go ahead.
Here's my question. Maybe you do have more, but I'm wondering about, you know how in education we're always all in on one thing. So when I heard you talking about, what's I think primarily important is that students have this background knowledge and vocabulary. I know that there will be people that will say, well, then why do we even have standards at all, right? Why do we even need our curriculum to align to standards? It should just all be about this knowledge building and vocabulary. Can you speak to that a little bit of why we wouldn't necessarily want to go completely in that direction and just abandon standards?
That's a really good question. I can give you the cynical answer, and I can give you the pedagogical answer. You want both?
Sure.
Of course. Yeah.
The cynical is states have to make tests. And if they have to make tests, they have to have questions. And they have to figure out what kind of questions to ask, so they need standards. That would be the cynical answer. It's not terribly cynical. It is the truth. But the better answer is, I think, or the more intellectually valid answer is, knowledge and vocabulary are both grown by reading, much more than any other way. Vocabulary, for example, peaks at about a 5th to 6th grade level. Oral vocabulary, what you hear on television or what you hear in normal discussion, peaks at about the 5th and 6th grade level. This has actually been studied in that psychologists go in and they create auditory tapes of conversations in offices and academic centers, and then they take the transcript and they analyze it for the average vocabulary level, and it feelings out at about a 5th or 6th grade level. And but whereas with written text is just more complex, and that means that if you want to expand your vocabulary beyond 5th or 6th grade, it has to be done by reading. So the best way to grow vocabulary is by reading, and the way to jet propel vocabulary growth is by reading a series of texts on a topic based on this Cervetti work that I described and other research. And the best way to grow knowledge is by reading. And it doesn't matter if it's on a screen or a paper, it's the best way to grow knowledge. So if the best way to grow knowledge and vocabulary is by reading, we want to make sure that kids are reading with depth and with precision. And the standards essentially are nothing more or less than a series of understandings about a text that reflect a deep and wide understanding of a text. So for standard 2, it's not just what's the main idea of the text, is what's the central idea or ideas of the text and how do they unfold as the text progresses. So in other words, the standards are designed to be questions or prompts that dig into a text so the student gets as much out of the text as possible by using those prompts or using those questions. And if the student gets as much out of the text as possible, they will invariably grow their knowledge and grow their vocabulary. So the standards are needed to maximize the probability of students getting a great deal out of the text. Does that help?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. David, I like that. I think about your example with standard 2, and as you were talking that through, I was like, yeah, absolutely. You cannot do standard 2 without standard 4, right? You have to know the vocabulary in order to get the central message or the central idea. So they're not in isolation either. They're going together, and there's usually many of them that are grouping together to support what's happening and unpacking in the text. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely true. Did you ever play a game? This you might not know this because you're not my age, which is a few years older than God. But have you ever played a game Cat's Cradle with strings?
Yes.
So you know what it is,
vaguely familiar.
Yes.
You create all these knots with a string and you hold it between your two hands. And Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist, said the human genome is like cat's cradle. Whenever you tweak one part of the structure, every other part of the structure invariably vibrates. You've affected everything else. And reading is the same way. The difficulty of vocabulary affects your understanding, your ability to understand the theme. But on the other hand, if you have relatively more difficult vocabulary, but a relatively simple, straightforward theme, it might help you determine the meaning of some of those words. But if you have a subtle or multiple themes and difficult vocabulary, they interact to make that text more complex. And then, of course, the structure might be simple, or the structure might be straightforward, or the point of view might shift throughout the text, or the syntax might be simple, or the syntax might be more complex. Every part of text reverberates against every other part of text, exactly as you described with vocabulary and theme.
I feel like that so relates to the question that I'm sure Melissa gets this all the time too, but teachers and leaders alike both always ask, well, what about if students read something, either on a test or just generally speaking, that isn't about what they've already gained background knowledge on or gained knowledge on? Like, what happens then? They don't have the knowledge and vocabulary. Can you speak to that? Because I think it directly relates to what you just talked about.
It does. When you're reading about, when you spend 6 to 8 weeks on immigration, for example, and written wisdom, you're not just learning about immigrants. You're learning a little bit about geography. You're learning a little bit about history. You're learning a little bit about different types of text. You're learning a little bit about different nationalities. And you're learning a little bit about art, in the case of written wisdom, how art portrays people, and different peoples and different people's point of view. You're learning a wide range. And so when you come to a text that may be about Western expansion, you might not have studied Western expansion, but you learned a little bit about geography from all your different modules, or you'll learn a little bit about different types of text, or you'll learn a little bit about different groups of people, or you'll learn a little bit about different pieces of history. I mean, think about any nonfiction book that you're reading. It doesn't just teach you about that topic. When you take a simple third grade, a relatively straightforward, simple second or third grade book on sharks that I've seen in a lot of these curriculums that I've worked with, you learn a lot about sharks, but you learn about the difference between a fish and a mammal. You learn about different climates. You learn about ocean currents. You learn about people's attitude towards predators. You learn what a predator is. There's all kinds of knowledge that radiates out. And when you're studying different topics over the course of 30 weeks in a year, you learn bits and pieces of all of this. And of course, the more you read, the more you learn. And then when you come to a text on a topic that you might not have studied that topic, but little pieces of that topic you will have in your background knowledge that will make it much more likely for you to understand that text. And that's a really good question. It comes up a lot.
Yeah. Can I tell a silly story?
Sure.
Okay. You have to go with me on this one. Melissa's going to laugh really hard. So when I was younger, like little, not like maybe let's say between 8 and 10, and then this continued, but not in the same fashion. I hated to take showers. So I would go into the bathroom and turn the shower on, and I would read the Time magazines that were sitting on the bathroom floor, like forever, to the point where like my dad would be banging on the door, like, "Are you finished showering yet?" And I hadn't even gotten in the shower. And I would just consume these Time magazines because I was so taken with the fact that they were things that I had not gotten to read about in school. I'm in my school, we had basal readers. It was the 80s. That's what we had available, and that's what we used. But I didn't want to read like a fictitious story about two BFFs who were skipping through the park on, a Thursday afternoon. And it was insane for me to read these Time magazines and to be consuming this content. But in hindsight, that complex text that was well above my comprehension level, but that I, over time, began to comprehend because I had built enough knowledge about it. I had read enough magazines. I had read enough about a topic, different topics that were obviously cyclical. Like, they're constantly reporting on the war, or they're constantly reporting on the current events that are happening. The vocabulary became very readily available, and then I could transfer that to what I was reading on my own or what I was reading in school. But in hindsight, I felt like, it's so interesting to look at that experience and in hindsight and see what an impact it made on even, my test-taking abilities in school, because nobody knew I was doing that except for me. And so it's just really interesting that you say that in like your rationale, David, because it, this little snippet of an experience from my childhood, it just like plays in my mind as having a huge impact on lots of other pieces. And I just it's so incredible that students now have that opportunity in school to have that experience with complex text versus, basal readers. So just a little story to hit home on that point. But I do shower now regularly without wasting water. So I just want to say that.
I was going to wait and see if if that question came up, but because you were reading Time magazine, you essentially it's a current event. It was, I don't even know if it still exists. It's a current event magazine, and so you were in essence you were making text sets for yourself, because whatever they wrote about China or about inventions or about discoveries, they would follow up on it, and the next week would have something similar. So very much you were creating a text set, like in the Cervetti and Hwang study, with a conceptual or coherent set of texts about birds. It wasn't quite as solid as that study, but the topics overlap and the topics continue with a news magazine like Time. So you were creating your own text sets. Similar. My son never chose to read anything on his own until I don't know if it was his first year of law school or last year of college, where he read Harry Potter. But he never chose to read anything on his own. He was a good student. He worked on what he had to. But the only thing he chose to read on his own was Mad Magazine and Sports Illustrated. But essentially, he read Sports Illustrated religiously for I don't know how many years. So he created a giant text set in the same way that you created a text set. By reading a series of texts on a topic, you grow Tier 2 vocabulary far more than any other way you can, including novels, which tend not to have as much. I can give an example from a third grade lesson that I saw a few years ago. They were reading series of texts on sea mammals, and they're reading about, I think it was about the dolphins, and it says they ascend to the surface, and then it says they descend, and then later on, a few sentences later, they descend. Now, in that one page, or 1.5 pages, you have Tier 2 words, ascend, surface, and descend. But the kids were able to easily figure that out because they've been studying sea mammals, and they know that they're mammals, that they have to go to the top of the surface in order to breathe, so they could figure out right away what ascend means. And then they know they have to go back down in order to eat and find their food, so they could figure out what descend means. And in between ascending and descending, they were at the surface. So you have 3 powerful Tier 2 words, ascend, descend, and surface. And isn't that a more pleasurable way to learn vocabulary than anything you can possibly think of? There are fun vocabulary games, and there are great books on vocabulary that make it fun and exciting, but that's the best way to learn vocabulary. And that's why a series of texts is so powerful for learning vocabulary. And that's probably why, how you developed the vocabulary, I would say, above and beyond your peers who were reading from basals.
Yeah. That's an excellent point. I love that example of in context with the text set at that child level to be able to pull out those vocabulary words. I think that will hit home with many of our listeners. Melissa, do you have any other questions for David?
Well, I think we're probably nearing the end, so I think we'll just wrap up with our last question, which is always, you gave a million pieces of advice already, but if there's any last pieces of advice you would give to teachers, leaders, especially those who are implementing these new curricula, what would that be?
Well, for teachers implementing these new curricula, I really think, as I said earlier, do the curriculum. Try not to get diverted to anything else at all. Give yourself the luxury of time to learn this curriculum. It doesn't get learned in a few months. But we're seeing evidence that it works. Baltimore had an increase in their scores after 1 year of implementation. Usually after 1 year of implementation of any new curriculum, scores go down. That didn't happen in Baltimore. The same thing, Detroit, which had a lot of obstacles because of everything that went on there, had the largest gains in Michigan after 1 year of implementation of EL. Bookworms, which is a high-quality material, it did not get all green from Ed Reports, and I disagree vehemently with that decision. And however, in 2 districts, in Delaware and Maryland, that implemented Baltimore, after 1 year, both those districts had the highest score gains in the state after 1 year of implementation. And EL had a national evaluation done by Mathematica, I think, with middle school showing increased gains after 2 years of implementation of EL at the middle school level. So these high-quality materials are beginning to show results. And there's a learning curve in all of them, but my biggest piece of advice is to throw yourself into the curriculum and avoid any other distractions or initiatives.
That's great advice. What advice would you give to leaders?
Give your teachers the luxury of time. Teachers, like in any profession, there are weak teachers, strong teachers, and everybody in between. Some teachers will really master this curriculum in a year. Some will need 2 or 3. And give teachers the luxury of time to learn this curriculum, but also do whatever you can to block any other extraneous initiatives. We can't ask teachers to do 19 different things at once. Teaching is the freaking hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I was a principal for 10 years. I've been a consultant. There were joys in all of them, but nothing was as demanding as teaching. And I taught for about 20 years, grades 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and mostly those grades.
That's
Although
so helpful. Thank you, David.
Occasionally I substituted in kindergarten, which was beyond the most demanding effort of my life.
I bet. Melissa's a secondary teacher at heart, so kindergarten probably seems like a foreign world.
I can't even imagine.
When our school that Meredith and I started was small, I taught kindergarten math back-to-back for 2 periods, and then did lunch with all our kindergarten classes, and then I got back to my office, and I thought I was going to be an alcoholic. This was when I was a young guy running 50 or 60 miles a week, and it practically killed me.
Well, you're still here. You made it through. Well, thank you so much, David. We can't thank you enough. It's been a true honor talking with you, and I'm sure Melissa feels the same way. We're just
we really
so
appreciate that.
Well, you're very welcome. You guys run a fun podcast. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. All right, well, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will talk to you soon.
Okay, take care.
All right, bye.